Welcome. I'm International Grandmaster Karel van der Weide, and I'm doing a series of opening surveys on Chessedelic. These surveys are about opening variations I studied in the past, so I feel entitled to say something about it. Today I want to tell you something about a variation from the Sveshnikov. Of course we know Sveshnikov goes like this: e4, c5, knight f3, knight c6, d4, exchange on d4, knight d4, knight f6, knight c3, e5, knight b5, d6, bishop g5, a6, knight a3, b5. And here of course are some ways to play knight e5 at once is possible, but also bishop takes f6, pawn takes f6, and now white's playing for the weak white squares, d5, f5, trying to put his knight there, control it with his other pieces, bishop, open d-file, but black's chances should not be underestimated. Black has some dynamics, and not to forget pair of bishops. So line goes knight e5, and black has two important ways of continuing here. We see in the game f5, but an alternative is bishop g7, trying to exchange knight on d5 by letting follow knight e7. Okay, so in the game I would like to take a look at f5, bishop d3, bishop e6, castling. Now usually bishop takes d5 is played. Some alternative, if black chooses to play f4, white has immediate counter on the queen side with c4, and let's say b4 there are some tactics: queen a4, bishop d7, knight b5. That's very nice, because now if you take on b5, queen takes a8 and there's a fork on c7, so rook c8, queen takes a6, and the attack on the g2 pawn by bishop h3, this threat, well, it can be easily prevented by playing f3. So let's continue with the main line. Bishop takes d5, e takes d5, knight e7. Okay, well, this is the position I want to examine a bit closer with you, because, well, I've skipped some important variations in the Sveshnikov, but here a lot of moves have been played in the past, a lot of ideas, and I would like to focus on rook e1, which I saw for the first time. Of course it was known before. I saw it played by Magnus Carlsen. I was sitting next to him by the Open Norwegian Bridge Championship, and well, when you see such a very bright child play a move like this in the opening, you know that something important is going on. So what are the ideas of rook e1? Well, white is just developing his rook, put rook on open or semi-open file. There is in the future maybe some pressure against the e5 pawn, but what's more important is that White is creating a hideout for his bishop on f1. There it looks much more harmonious than let's say on e2 if it's attacked by the e5 pawn. So with bishop on f1 in the future, White can pressurize weak queenside pawns of black on a6 and b5 by a future a2, a4. Okay, first of course the knight has to move c3, knight c2. We will see this all happen in this line. And it's a bit different from approaches that were used before, because usually bishop on d3 would rather go to after c3 to c2 to pressure on the b1 h7 diagonal against black king, who will castle kingside in the future. So some different approach by Magnus. It was not originally his idea, it was played before, but let's see how it what happens. So bishop g7, which is normal. There have also been some games in this line here with rook b1. Some ideas with c4 or b4, but it looks more logical to play c3, just in order to relocate the knight on a3, and also defending against e4 threat bishop takes b2. So now black can still force his way through with e4 and b4. Let's say what happens. e4, bishop f1, b4, but you can take it now. C takes b4, bishop b2, and there's no threat now against the knight on a3. You can easily move your rook, rook b1, bishop takes a3, because in the end you have queen a4 with tactics. And this is a very favorable position for White. White will just regain his piece and then just push the queenside pawn, where on queenside you have majority of 2 against 1. So that's no threat. So therefore black usually castles, and queen h5 now in order to attack f5 pawn, and black always plays e4. Here it's very logical move in Sveshnikov to push his center majority. And now we see how this idea with the rook e1 has resulted in that you have a nice square on f1, as we told, to pressurize queenside. But also bishop on f1 is a very nice defender. There are in the future threats on g-file are not so dangerous, because you have this square protected. You have some white square defense. Okay, so well, here there are some ideas. Usually rook e8 is played. Queen c8 is also a very normal move. Black protects f5 pawn, and in order to relocate his knight, the knight goes to g6 in the future, we will see. Okay, so rook d1 in order to protect d5 pawn, and okay, black can go 2 ways now. Queen c5 is an important line, and knight c2, and now d5 pawn, knight takes d5 gets exchanged against f5 pawn, queen takes f5, but it appears that after knight f6, knight e3, White has very nice control. His central pressure with his rooks, knight, which was first on a3, is now fully back in the center, and pawns on d6, e4 are extremely weak. So therefore, in this position, black usually doesn't go for the pawn hunt. He plays knight g6. So g3 now, in order to get some squares. Knight f4 sometimes was a threat. And also to fix this guy on f5. We will soon see what happens. Because rook e8, bishop on f1 has additional advantage. It can move to h3 now and attack weak f5 pawn. Rook e5, knight c2. And you see, in the end you cannot defend the guy on f5 because knight e4 or knight e3 is coming, and it's a 3 against 2. So black has to seek counterplay. Let's say queen c4, knight e3, queen takes e2, queen e2. And well, this was played in a couple of games. There was a game of Nigel Short against Krashenkov, a strong Polish grandmaster, and not only Krashenkov, but also other players decided to sacrifice the queen here. Queen on a2 is in problems. White is threatening to capture it. Otherwise, if you go away with queen a5, well, the pawn on f5 is just lost. And again, what we see, white has nice pressure in the center. d6 is hanging, e4 is weak pawn. So maybe wise to sacrifice queen. It goes like this: f4, rook a1. Now to destroy the white queen side, after queen b3, rook a3, with queen takes e3, he takes a3, and now take the knight, f takes e3, queen takes e3. And well, in this game of short Krashenkov, black had compensation, but recently I saw a game against between two other grandmasters, and there white won very nicely. It went like this: knight e7, queen b6, knight takes d5, queen c6, rook e8, rook d1, e3. This is just a bit of a silly example. I don't want to go into details. It's not very relevant for an opening survey, but just for fun. f4, e2, rook e1, rook e3, queen takes d5, bishop takes c3, and it looks like that black managed to to have more than full compensation, and the rook on e1 is in trouble. But there is lethal compensation against the black king. Queen g5, king a8, and suddenly bishop f5, and it appears that when black takes the rook on e1, queen h6, and checkmate on h7 is unavoidable. Because on desperado move bishop f2, of course you won't take it, you play king g2. So black resigned here. Okay, that was a bit for fun. It was not so serious, but just to see what can happen in these lines. Again, instead of we were here in this position, bishop f1, we looked at queen c8, rook e8 being main move. There is also b4 again, always have to calculate with b4. cb4, bishop b2, rook b1, and here we see it again. Bishop takes a3, you always gain the piece back with rook b3, and not only that, white has quite a lethal attack. There are some threats now with rook g3, king h8, rook h3, and checkmate on h7. On the other hand, if black returns the bishop to g7, white has very nice play in the center. Knight c4, you can easily sack the pawn on d5. Knight takes d5, rook d1, knight f6. You can capture f5 at once or provoke maybe further weakness with queen g5, which was played by best players in this line. And well, white has very strong pressure over these central files. Okay, so rook e8 being the main move here. White usually protects d5 pawn with rook a d1. Although there are also some games were played by good guys. I think Karel played once knight c2, just sack the d5 pawn against this f5 guy, and after rook e5, queen g4, f5, queen d1. White always has this idea with a2, a4 to attack this queen side, but you cannot underestimate black chances on king side. So I think it may be wise to play rook d1. Now here we go to a further branch. Usually rook c8 is played, although there are also games with knight g6, for example, which is a pawn sacrifice. And it should not be sufficient in the end, but still, let's take a look at it. Queen takes f5, rook e5, queen h3, knight f4, queen g3, and okay, again, there's a split here. Let's say queen f6, play c4 to defend your pawn on d5, b4, knight c2, a5, b3. Well, White is well organized, and well, if you simply count, he's a pawn up. And as I told you, these threats against white king on g-file, there's always this excellent defender bishop on f1, and even after some rook g5, queen goes away, and even well, you have g2 is well defended, and white pieces are well organized. It shouldn't be that much of a problem. On the other hand, if we saw this position, pawn sacrifice, queen g3, if black decides to take the pawn on d5 back at once, then you also have some ways to gain advantage. F4, strong move. Takes on f3, rook takes e5, takes back, queen takes f3. There's a pin now on the d file. Queen b6 to get out quickly, king h1, knight c7, rook d7. Initiative against the black king. f7 is hanging, rook f8, c4, b4, knight c2, and I think this can be considered as a position which is slightly better for white, because you have less pawn islands. It's 3 islands for black against 2 for white, and furthermore you have nice rook on d7 who's controlling 7th rank, and pieces look quite okay. So not advisable for black to play in this way. I think black has to seek his counterplay either from queen c8 or rook c8. Rook c8, these lines are very complicated. Now let's see what happens. Rook e3 and rook c5. Black is aiming for his pawn on d5. Which has to be defended with c4. Take c4, rook h3, a6, knight takes c4. So this is also a crucial position for this line. Me myself, I had this on the board twice, and well, let's look at some ideas. f4 I had in my game against Timoshenko, and it seems that white can get some advantage here. I thought it was with b4, yes, just to push my queenside majority, and the guy played rook b5 and I came with rook b3 and I pushed my queen side. Yes, there was something here. So after queen takes c4, maybe not f4. Best move after analysis seems to be knight takes d5, but rook takes d5. Let's see what happens here. Okay, so rook has to be changed on d5. queen takes f5. Now there's also important split. Knight e7 is maybe not the best move. Queen f5, d5, knight e5, threat against pawn on f7, so f5, but white can offer an exchange here on h6. It's very dangerous to take the guy. The king is very exposed. So in the game I had, my opponent played queen b8, but here I was able to defend both pieces which were attacked by rook e6. Bishop takes e5, rook takes e5, and it still seemed a tall order here for white to conclude matters, but luckily I had tactical blast, rook takes e4, and queen on d6 is not defended. So after queen takes f5, maybe knight c7 is a bit more stubborn. Knight queen f4 to attack d6 pawn, rook e6, knight e3, d5, knight f5. I still think that white has some attacking chances. Black has to be very careful with g-file or pawn h6, which is weak at some moments. So therefore this position, and it was analyzed once, knight takes d5 is yeah, maybe best move here for black. Queen takes f5, and here, well, things are very tactical, you know, because of course when the knight moves there's a vis-a-vis between rook on c5, queen on f5, but on the other hand it's pinned, you know, there's also vis-a-vis here, so it's a bit of a crossfire. Okay, but, and also computer analysis shows that e3 here is the best move. With bishop d3, white frees his bishop, and there are also some threats now against black king. There's no danger in e2, just take the promotion square and nothing will happen. The knight f6 appears to be the best move here. Queen is attacked, so queen f4. Take on f2, and there were some analysis with queen takes f2, which looks like most normal move, but somehow I thought queen on f4 was good, so my novelty would have been king takes f2. I have never had a chance to try it. Well, some small analysis. d5, knight e6, and with queen b6 there's a very dangerous doppelschach, double check is threatened, but after king a1, well, I thought white has some chances here. There's always some nasty knight f5 and some attack, so who knows. Okay, so this was this position in line with rook c8, which is okay, very double-edged, and queen c8 is maybe most normal move, but also here we see that white has some chances. Knight c2, knight g6, and now several moves have been played here in the past. I always was an adherent of g3, but maybe knight d4 is also an idea. And then if you take with bishop, until now all games went rook takes d4, but it might be interesting to take with c-pawn. And next move, play rook to c1 and come over, open c-file, and well, it's who knows what happens. So okay, it's just an idea. Let g3. f4 now is probably best move, and it's interesting to see that there's a transposition here to this queen sacrifice we've seen before. If you play rook e5, bishop a3, queen c4, knight e3, queen takes a2, queen e2, and we have the same position as we've seen before. Here white has this choice, black has this choice against saving his queen by queen a5, then the f5 pawn will be lost, or sack his queen with f4, rook a1. So that's nice. f4 is also a better attempt. Knight d4 now, and well, most games showed bishop takes d4, and but it's difficult with not so many games played. What will be definite conclusion? I once had rook a5 in a game against a young Dutch player, so he did not exchange his bishop. And well, it was complicated, but White always had some ideas to continue. Queen h3, and the queens were exchanged. Rook h5. Here I played bishop g2 just in order to provoke some f5, which will put the rook out of play. Well, it didn't happen at once. I beg your pardon. f3, bishop f1, f5. Okay, I played knight e6, and just to show you what can happen in these lines if you play knight e5 with the idea to go to g4. Well, you can exchange bishop against knight, take on g7, rook d4, and well, that's always your idea in these positions. a2, a4, you always have some pressure against black queen side. So okay, but a young Dutch player in this position, he didn't play knight e5, he kept his bishop e5, but still I played rook d2, and I continued with a4 and rook a1. So, but even without queens, the attack on white king should not be underestimated. There are still some pieces in the neighborhood, so better watch out. So usually we knight is exchanged at once. Bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, rook e5. And in my analysis I always played queen h3, although I saw Dutch talented player Brandenburg continue two of his game with queen h6, keeping queens on the board. And there is something to say for that as well. But in my analysis I concluded that after exchange of queens, queen takes, bishop takes, rook h5, bishop g2, f5, f3. I thought that in the ending White had some slight advantage. So maybe this is an idea for you to play in the future. This Sveshnikov with rook e1 on the 14th move. There are some complications, but of course there are complications in each line nowadays, and White has a clear plan on the queen side with a2, a4. So I hope you enjoyed it, and maybe you will see some more of my lectures. Thanks.